scholarly fields, as well as the many that are closely linked, including linguistics, communication studies, and so many others. What I want to say today is that UCLA-Sociology continues to thrive, in part by, as the saying goes, standing on the shoulders of giants. And there's one very important giant that I think we all need to be thinking about, and of course that's Manny. Manny was one of our very own giants. We are indebted to Manny. A good part of our department's legacy and reputation is closely tied to Manny's landmark scholarly contributions, as well as his celebrated teaching and mentoring. This legacy lives on and is carried forward through the first-rate contemporary work happening in our department, including work by faculty including John Heritage, Steve Klayman, Tanya Stivers, Giovanni Rossi, and the scores of students they have collectively trained, many of whom themselves are now scholars at leading institutions across the world. UCLA Sociology is a field-leading department in some good measure due to the legacy of Manny's research and teaching and how these are carried forward today. I'll end my remarks by saying that Professor Manny Schegloff leaves behind a wonderful legacy at UCLA and well beyond. The strength of our training wouldn't be what it is today in research methods and theory and so many other areas. Instruction and other leading programs across the world would be lacking were it not for Manny's guidance on theory and research methodology. And really importantly, there's the human side, which we'll be talking about a lot today. Manny showed that one could be both a world-changing scholar while still being a thoughtful and supportive colleague and mentor. He was, and truly is, a model for us all to follow. This is an incredible legacy, and we are here to both mourn and, importantly, I want to say celebrate that today. I'll now pass things to John Heritage for his opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ed, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming, and for those of us who may be here online, but maybe not, given the vagaries of YouTube and such things, welcome aboard. I want to thank the UCLA Sociology Department and the Schegloff family for coming together to bring about this very special event. We are all very much in your debt. We're here to celebrate the life and legacy of Manny Schegloff, and what a life it has been. Manny's achievements as a scholar, teacher, mentor, and all-around mensch defy enumeration or summary, but of course I'm going to try to do it in a very few words. First, his achievements as a scholar. In his war diaries, the German sociologist Georg Simmel observed that there are two kinds of academic legacies. One is cash. Concepts, empirical findings, perhaps in profusion, but ultimately, like cash, moving anonymously into the stream of intellectual discourse, becoming a part of common currency. The other kind of legacy that Simmel identified is real estate, an interlinked, functioning structure of intellectual content and methodology. Something you can build on, even remodel, but which will still retain its identity as an organized framework of inquiry. In the field of sociology, I think it's fair to say that Emil Durkheim left real estate. Irving Goffman, by contrast, left cash. A vast and intricate one might all admire his bank balance in more than one sense of the word, but not real estate. Manny's legacy is real estate, and he is its most prominent and fundamental architect. What talents were necessary to establish a field like this one? First is the ability to find puzzles and problems in human social life that no one had ever noticed before, and to solve them intellectually satisfying and rigorous ways. Second is to build a systematic conceptual architecture with which to organize what you found. Third is to develop methods of working and to train others so that the project can be, as it were, exported to others. And last, and most importantly, to hold fast and anchor the disciplinary foundations of a field when many other people think you're dead wrong. Unique and creative perception, conceptual rigor, inspirational ability as a teacher, steadfastness of vision. All of these are essential to those who would build disciplinary real estate. And Manny had all of those in full measure. I think it's safe to say at this point that Manny's vision has now permeated the entire field of social interaction. His methods are now practiced in all the continents of the world and in the study of social interaction in literally now hundreds of languages and in thousands of published papers. It's quite a legacy. I joined the UCLA faculty in 1988, and from the very first, Manny and Myra took us, my wife Margaret and I, under their wing. They helped us to navigate the puzzling administrative structures and the strange social customs of the United States. They helped us with real estate, even to the point of one afternoon insect bombing an infested house that we had newly rented in Brentwood, of all places. We went to the Jazz Bakery with them many times. I'm sure many of you will remember that Manny was a jazz aficionado, as he also was of Thai food, that also many of you may have partaken with him. There were debates about the relative merits of Bach and Mahler, though I've rather come round to Manny's point of view on that over the years. And there were many brunches at their home in Topanga. Manny and Myra were the kindest of mentors and hosts. For about half of the 20 years we worked together, Manny and I had adjacent offices. We spent many hours together working on different issues, and I observed how he spent many, many more mentoring the dozens of graduate students who came to him with data in many different languages. You'll hear from a few of them later on. Manny was enormous fun to be around. He had an infectious joy in the analysis of data that was singular and irresistible. His brilliance in analysis was incomparable. It was a privilege to hang out with him for so many years. I miss him very, very much. Thank you. Our next speaker, I keep forgetting about the mic. Our next speaker, Bill Roy, scarcely needs any introduction from us. He has served in our department. Oh, I've jumped the rails here. It's now my pleasure. Well, you know, stuff happens, doesn't it? Thank you very much for the prompt. It's now my pleasure to introduce Myra Schegloff and Naomi Schegloff for their reflections on Manny's life and legacy.
Welcome, everyone, and there's a large audience here. Thank you very much for coming. I met Manny when I was 18 and he was 21. I was a freshman at Berkeley. He was a first-year graduate student in sociology. I asked him what sociology was, not knowing much about anything at that point, and he said, I'm a teaching assistant right now. Why don't you come to my class? So I did. And I was transfixed. He was so excited with teaching. Obviously loved teaching. And he loved his subject. And I got a notion of what sociology could be, at least. But mainly I realized that he was charming and thoughtful and smart, and that has proven to be the case. And as excited as he was about sociology in general, when he met Harvey Sachs and Gail Jefferson, and they created a whole new field within sociology, he was even more excited. And he lived a very good life. We were married for 62 years. He was at sociology at UCLA for about 40 years. UCLA nurtured him, and he nurtured UCLA students. We traveled a lot. He was giving talks all over the world, And when we as a family got to see the world through his eyes, and we got to see the world together.
As an undergrad at Berkeley, I enrolled in the Introduction to Linguistics class that was a requirement for all anthropology majors. When I met my TA for the first time, she informed me that all of the TAs had been looking around the packed lecture hall on day one, trying to figure out which one of the 200 plus students was Schegloff's kid. So hi, it's me. I'm Naomi. I'm Schegloff's kid. I thought a lot about what I wanted to say in my few minutes today, and ultimately was moved by a question one of Dad's former students asked me recently. What was Manny like as a parent? My dad was like a lot of other dads, I'm sure, with maybe a little something extra. Like many parents, he wanted to remember the little things from my childhood. Years ago, I was looking for something in his home office, and I came across a scrap of paper titled Naomi's First Riddle, age 3.5, followed by this handwritten transcription. N, Dad, how big is my belly button? D, your belly button is a very nice size. N, no, how big is my belly button? D, I don't know, how big is your belly button? N, 3.5 whumpets. I then apparently burst out laughing because obviously it was hilarious, and Dad wrote it down because he thought it was important and deserved his attention, and because he did, I know myself a little better, and now so do you. There are many more examples of his particular take on parenting, like how, starting sometime in elementary school, he paid me $0.25 for every unintended pun I noticed in the world and reported back to him. You know, like all kids. Or how, in 1980s Los Angeles, he would raise a finger every time I, like my adolescent peers, peppered whatever I was saying with superfluous likes because he asserted it made me sound less intelligent than I was, and he wanted to draw attention to just how frequently I used them. We'd be riding in the car, and I'd start talking about something, and his finger would be dancing all over the steering wheel. I got the point. But I think any of you who studied with Dad actually already has a pretty good sense of what he was like as a parent. I say this remembering his devastation when one of his students, Sally Jacoby, lost her battle with cancer. It hadn't occurred to me that a teacher might care so deeply about his students. He tried to help me understand, saying, "Babe, you're my only child, but I also have intellectual children." So maybe you also found him to be genuinely curious, warm, playful, sometimes relentless, but always encouraging, wanting you to be serious about whatever you were currently working on. Maybe, like me, he asked you to pay more attention to the world and the people around you, and to be a better version of yourself. You should know that you meant the world to him. You really did. Dad lived largely in his brain, and he was the first to know that something was wrong. We poo-pooed his concerns at first. Maybe it was a sleep apnea. He wasn't sleeping well. But Dad knew how his mind worked, and he knew when it started to work differently. Many times over the years, I've wondered why it had to be Alzheimer's. When there are so many ways our bodies can betray us, why did it have to be something that gradually altered his big, beautiful brain, eventually affecting his ability to speak of all things? It didn't seem fair, and honestly, it still doesn't. The thing is, even if over time his actual words didn't always make sense, he was still absolutely able to communicate. In addition to whatever words he was able to conjure, the man knew how to make a point with a facial expression, a gesture, the inflection of his voice. His eyes still welled up when he felt passionate about something. He still had a sly smile on his face when he was being mischievous. He was a differently powerful communicator. One day he and I were holding hands, and he was telling me something I couldn't quite make out, a kind of word salad. And he chuckled as he finished. I didn't know what to say, so I smiled and sighed and said, "Oh, Dad, I love you." And he responded, clear as a bell, "I love you too, babe," and kissed my hand. He was still my dad. He still is. And I'm so, so grateful. When Mom and I discussed what kind of funeral or celebration of life we wanted for him, it was clear that it needed to be centered on his work, because his work was his life. So thank you all for today. Thank you to Ed and Carol in the sociology department for making this possible. I can't see in these classes, but I know you're somewhere. Thank you to John for helping make today a reality in so many ways and being such an amazing support, and for being our host with the most. And thank you to everyone who chooses to share your memories and reflections from the podium or on the memorial website or over a tasty snack at the reception. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
Okay, now I get to introduce Bill Roy. Bill really doesn't need any introduction from me. He's served in our department longer, I think, than all of us, and is a deep source of our institutional memory. If we were all members of the British House of Commons, he would be called the Father of the House. With that, on that note, Bill, take it away.
When I came here in 1976, and I know some of you were here before that, when I came here in 1976, my wife Alice knew of one sociologist in the department. It was Manny Schegloff. She was doing a dissertation in linguistics, in irony and conversation. And of course she had read Schegloff. You know, how could you do a dissertation on irony and conversation without knowing Schegloff? As it turned out, Manny, I think, had more influence on me than he did on Alice over the course of our careers. I had been trained as a macro positivist, sociologist, and methodology and conversation analysis opened a whole new world that I knew nothing about. It had been totally outside all my training. I had considered race, gender, and class characteristics of individuals. I learned that they were relational frames that were performed. I had considered them that were qualities that were just there. I learned that they were social relations that had to be explained. The idea that analysis should begin by suspending all those qualities at first was a notion that I rejected initially, but soon came to see the great insight in it. In the end, I even wrote a book that treated race, gender, class, along with time and space, as things that had to be explained empirically and conceptually. So EM and CA represented an approach to sociology that made UCLA special, not only in terms of the content of it as being very different, but the very way of looking at the world. Michigan had had a debate on symbolic interaction, ethnomethodology, and all that crazy stuff. But the debate turned out to be over the reasons why they didn't belong in sociology. We took great pride in being the broadest, most intellectually diverse department in the country, a place where entirely new modes of sociology could be invented and could thrive. The question, but is it sociology? Never had a place here. You couldn't ask it. The standard was always, does the scholar or work have insight, rigor, and depth? And no one's work had more insight, rigor, and depth than Manny's. While Manny helped invent a mode of sociology that some people, I think, still see as esoteric, his comprehension of the discipline was as broad as anybody in the department. Whenever there were job talks or colloquia, he would ask something about that person's intellectual environment, asking a demographer how his work compared to Otis Dudley Duncan, asking macrosociologists about how their work worked with Millian logic, asking women, doing women's studies about the second wave of feminism. And his questions were always better than the ones that I could just ask here. They always got to the heart of whatever the person was talking about. And then there was Manny the person. He was always engaging, cheerful, stimulating, and supportive to be not only one of the wisest people in the department, but as far as I knew, everybody's friend. It was one of the reasons we have been one of the more collegial departments in the country. While certainly we have our debates now and then, we've always been very deeply collegial, very respectful for everybody in the department. Many of us probably remember the brunches that Manny and Myra had in their Topanga home, where you could engage Manny on any topic, where we met Myra and Naomi, and they could talk about just about anything as well. And of course, we all remember his humor, or more precisely, his wit. Humor makes you laugh. Wit evokes laughter, but also with insight. One of my favorites is when Alice, who was from Philadelphia, was complaining about all the things that people from the East complain about Los Angeles. Manny said, "You people from back East, you bitch and you moan and groan, but you don't go back." His wit was displayed in his office with a wall full of "You Are Here" cartoons that many of you will remember. I'm reminded of a quote from Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. That you are here, that life exists an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. This quotation was written in present tense. You are here. Manny is still here in many of our lives. And he certainly contributed a verse to the world. But he inspired us to question what a verse is all about anyway. Thank you.
I'm very pleased to introduce Rogers Brubaker. Rogers is a distinguished professor of sociology, a UCLA Foundation chair, and MacArthur Award recipient, among many other distinctions. He is also, I believe, the only faculty member who has taken one of Manny's classes in conversation analysis, which is another distinction, I think, in its own right. Rogers.
Indeed, 25 years ago, I found myself sitting in on Manny's foundational two-quarter sequence in conversation analysis. And not just sitting in, but doing the reading and the homework, even taking the quizzes and the exams, and, if memory serves correctly, suffering the minor humiliation of getting a B+. Manny was a superb teacher, and that class was one of the intellectual high points of my time at UCLA. But it wasn't just an intellectual feast. The encounter with Manny's work and with his way of thinking altered the trajectory of my own work. It transformed the way I thought about phenomena like ethnicity and gender, and it led me to incorporate some micro-interactional analysis, even a bit of CA, into some of my work. The class was followed by a data workshop in the spring quarter, in which we spent 10 weeks delving into the moment-to-moment unfolding of a single telephone conversation. I still have a marked up copy of the transcript of that conversation showing which passages we focused on each week. And just to give you an idea of the level of granularity of the discussions, we spent 20 hours that spring discussing about 2 minutes of the phone conversation. And I'm sure Manny would have said that we were only scratching the surface. Some famous sociologists who wrote brilliantly about interaction did so, as it were, from the outside. The brilliance of their insights was purchased by a certain alienation from interaction. The phrase alienation from interaction is, in fact, the title of one of Irving Goffman's early essays, and by all accounts, it applied to Goffman himself, as well as to Harold Garfinkel, but not to Manny, who was not only a great analyst of conversation and interaction, but a great conversationalist, a great interactant, warm, witty, engaging, as others have said. Many people here this afternoon are part of, or at least adjacent to, the flourishing enterprise of conversation analysis that Manny co-founded, an enterprise that's been enormously successful and influential throughout the world across a range of disciplines. But others, including longstanding colleagues in the sociology department, may have only a somewhat vague idea of just how truly extraordinary Manny's accomplishments were. We, of course, were proud to have the world's leading authority on CA in our department. Of course, we realized that CA was a hugely impressive intellectual undertaking, but many of us have seen it as somehow peripheral to the core concerns of the discipline. My own view is that CA is, in fact, utterly central to the core concerns of sociology. So when we celebrate Manny's contributions today, we are celebrating him not only as the co-creator and longstanding leader of this flourishing transdisciplinary and transnational enterprise, we're also honoring him as a major sociological theorist, a theorist not only of talk, but of action, of interaction, of intersubjectivity, of the elementary forms of interaction and the basic structures of sociality. Powerful and systematic thinker, exacting and eloquent writer, acute observer, scrupulous craftsman, wise colleague, charismatic teacher. This is the Manny I came to know. It was an extraordinary privilege to have had this true intellectual giant, an absolutely inescapable word today, as Ed pointed out, one of the great social scientists of his generation, as a colleague and teacher. When I think of Manny, metaphors from the domain of light come inevitably to mind. Luminous, enlightening, clear, brilliant, incandescent, and warm. It was, and it still is, hard to accept that such an extraordinary luminosity of mind and character could ever be dimmed or extinguished. I miss him very much.
Our next speaker is Eleanor Oakes, also a MacArthur Award recipient. As a distinguished research professor of anthropology, she is, or at least was, from the floor upstairs, on the third floor of Haynes Hall. Eleanor and Manny co-founded the Center for Language, Interaction and Culture, which, if memory serves, is now in its 25th year. Ellie.
Okay, so it's 1970, and my first encounter with Manny is literary. I have just returned from ethnographic fieldwork in Madagascar, studying oratory as a speech event, when someone clues me in, writes me a letter, that there is a new line of inquiry brewing that examines the architecture of conversations. I am living in Cambridge, England. I am sent manuscripts of articles and lectures. I shift my dissertation to intertwine Malagasy oratory, which was men's territory, with informal conversation, which was women's territory. At the same time, I give birth to my twin boys, Toby and David. When they turn 2, I borrow a reel-to-reel video recorder from the Cambridge Psychology Department, begin recording their proto-conversations, and wonder how the field of anthropology will embrace such a micro landscape of sociality. I joined Cambridge linguistics faculty, pursuing the pragmatics of language. Then, in 1974, I moved to Los Angeles as an assistant professor in linguistics at USC and meet the great Manny Schegloff in person, who turns out to be a wonderful person and fierce scholar. He is, like John said earlier, a mensch. His wife, Myra, is also a mensch. We share common values. Manny kindly comes to give a guest lecture on transcription to my Social Foundations of Language class. There is a nexus of intellectual interests, though we work on different scales of analysis. We are friends. The years pass. Tragic and wonderful events transpire in our individual personal lives. In 1980, Alessandro Duranti and I should say, have a son, Marco. And 13 years later, Manny and Myra attend Marco's bar mitzvah. Manny comes to the altar and reads the Torah for him. In 1990, a position opens in the Department of Applied Linguistics at UCLA. Manny has worked hard to get this position, as applied linguistic graduate students are flooding his courses, and he is generously chairing their committees. I feel so very lucky to assume this position. Once ensconced at UCLA, I join a small coalition of faculty, Manny the instigator, John Heritage, Sandro Duranti, and John Schumann, who want to create a cross-disciplinary dialogic venue to understand interfaces of language, interaction, and culture. We create a directory of faculty who might want to join this adventure. We request and receive funding, and voila, click, the Center for Language, Interaction, and Culture is born and is still thriving decades later under the leadership of Tanya Stivers, wonderful Tanya Stivers. Click and other venues show Manny Schegloff to be at once fiercely orthodox about the parameters of talk and interaction, and just as fiercely eager for deep colloquy across disciplines. One day, years ago, Sally Jacoby, the same Sally Jacoby as John earlier talked about, a brilliant, highly opinionated, as many may remember, and devoted student of both Manny and me, she rushes into my office. She is grinning ear to ear. She has just come from Manny's seminar, where, she announces, Manny uttered a word in his lecture thought to be taboo in CA. Manny Schegloff used the E word, she says. And in a natural way, she says. The E word, I query? Ethnography. For Sally, Manny has opened the disciplinary door an inch to fieldwork. As for me, I see Manny Schegloff as at once an exacting yet generous scholar, colleague, and friend on just yet another quest to grasp ordinary life through interactional realities. Thank you.
Our next speaker is my colleague, Steve Clayman. Steve has been at UCLA nearly as long as I have, and he made the third member of the Schegloff Heritage Clayman CA group that offered a diversity of interaction-based classes here between 1990 and 2010. when Manny retired. So, Steve, the floor is yours.
Thanks, John. I'm honored to be joining this celebration for my friend and colleague, Manny Schegloff. I want to report that there was an earlier memorial for Manny held at the International Institute for Ethnomethodology and Conversation Analysis in South Korea last summer. Galina Bolden, who's here, was among the speakers. And then looking ahead, there will be panels in Manny's honor at next year's International Conversation Analysis Conference in Canada. These main international conferences that's centered around CA research routinely attract around 500 to 600 speakers. They come from almost every continent across the social sciences, as well as cognitive science, linguistics, and a whole bunch of practice areas like medicine, education, and AI. Manny cautioned us about the use of counterfactuals, but I'm very confident in this one. I don't think there would be any international conferences devoted to conversation analysis without Manny's work. Because, as John noted earlier, he wasn't just a contributor to this field, he was its co-creator and chief architect, as John put it. And he created this field in a most unpromising area, to say the least, one widely presumed to be chaotic and trivial and far removed from the established concerns of sociology. Many of my colleagues understand this at some level, but it's easy to lose sight of the magnitude of Manny's achievement, so that's what I'd like to dwell on in my little time here remaining. What did Manny have to do to create this field? Well, for starters, he had to establish that there's something there worth studying. That is, that these ordinary bits of talk had to be recognized as delivering elementary forms of conduct or action that undergird self-other relations and indeed much of social life. And he had to show that their study would have legs, and by that I mean that they would adumbrate larger domains of organization, interior or intrinsic to interaction itself, to which other people might contribute. Now, we're familiar with these domains today. They're the standard subfields in conversation analysis. You can read about them in any textbook and any review article: action formation, sequence organization, turn organization, repair, and so on. But someone had to come up with this arrangement and show how the pieces connect to one another. And it's remarkable how many of these domains were indeed established early on by Manny, both in his own writings and his collaborations with Harvey Sachs and Gail Jefferson. So Manny did that. Now, he also had to develop a new methodology, one that, the way I see it, exploited the affordances of this new interactional material and was innovative in all sorts of ways. Manny's approach, as many people know, combined naturalistic observation with a high degree of analytical precision. He blew up the conventional divide between qualitative and quantitative methods. As many of us in the room know, he gave due attention both to the complexities of the single case and also to patterns across cases. And I guess more radically, his approach embraced the apparent messiness of actual talk, treating the odd cases, the deviant cases, the hitches, the disfluencies, and so on, as valued forms of evidence. You might say that his methodology was built, in large part, on what others threw away in the name of data cleaning and statistical significance. Again, all of this is now taken for granted within our field, but it was utterly original when Manny started working in the mid-1960s. Now, the other remarkable thing about this achievement is that he got this new enterprise off the ground and running pretty much without the benefit of programmatic statements or manifestos. If you read his foundational papers from the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s, they are all empirical projects. Although they're designed to do the work of field building at the same time, So whatever he happens to be investigating, he's also working to show how the particular things he's looking at connect to something larger, that they adumbrate larger domains of organization, and usually these are things that no one recognized as existing before he called attention to them. And he's also, in these papers, putting his own methods on display to an extraordinary degree, offering, in effect, embedded tutorials on how to do the kind of meticulous work he was doing as he was doing it. So his papers operate on multiple levels, and I just want to invite you, if you haven't read Manny or haven't reread him lately, I'd invite you to dip into those papers and see the elegance with which that field-building project is being woven into the empirical work. Now, I'm told I have time, so if there is time, I'd like to share one story, I think, that illustrates some of these characteristic Mannyisms, you might say. I first met Manny in graduate school around 1985 when he came to UC Santa Barbara to give a talk that would later become the paper entitled Analyzing Single Episodes. In characteristic Manny fashion, this talk was at once a detailed single case analysis, but it was also a tutorial on how to do single case analyses in the CA manner. And it was also a spirited defense of single case accounting as he would have it, a primary obligation of CA, and he would say a primary obligation for social science more generally. Now, I was pretty much awestruck by this talk. There was the content, of course, but it was also the manner of delivery, which so resembled Manny's authorial voice as a writer. So many of you will know the long sentences, lots and lots of subordinate clauses stacked onto each other, and somehow he could keep track of them all through. And he did this even, in the body of the talk, but also when doing Q&A afterwards, clearly in spontaneous interaction. He's one of these guys who could speak in publishable paragraphs. I don't think it's fair, but nonetheless. Now that talk had a ripple effect. I had just submitted my CA field exam, and I thought it was finished. I had accounted for something like 97% of the cases in my collection. When I met with my advisor the following week, he said he'd been ready to give it a pass, but after hearing that talk, he sent me back to the drawing board to work on those last pesky few cases. And so about 10 to 15 years later, I shared this story with Manny, and he was absolutely tickled by it. He just loved the idea that he gave that talk at Santa Barbara, and I was sent back to the drawing board. Well, it was great. I mean, we had a good laugh about it, and the work got better in consequence. So I'm here to celebrate Manny for building this wonderful field, for holding us practitioners to the highest standards, and for insisting that we subordinate our own interests and our preoccupations to the interests and preoccupations of the people we're studying. And in that way, making us open to the possibility of discovering things that we didn't know existed before we came to the data. I think it's that potential for discovery that was, I suspect, at least part of the wellspring of the joy and enthusiasm that Manny had in his work that sort of showed through. People know this. If you had any encounter with him, you would see this. I take that capacity for discovery and the joy that we get from doing that kind of work as a very special kind of gift. Thank you, Manny.
I think the time has arrived for a public demonstration of my computer skills, or should I say the lack of them. Our next speaker, Anita Pomerantz, cannot be with us today. She sent us a recording, which I'll play in a moment. Computers and my skills willing. Anita is Professor Emerita from the University at Albany. She was one of the original students trained by Manny and Harvey Sachs, first at UCLA and then at Irvine, graduating in 1975, and subsequently publishing highly influential papers in the field. So she was in the field from the very beginning and ultimately, I guess, for the long haul. So now comes the display of skill.
I believe in you, John.
Thank you, thank you. That's what I desperately need, belief right now. Oh, gosh, she's here. She's appeared. Now, the only question now is, no, she's not quite ready for prime time. She needs to be sent back to the beginning, an earlier test. So I'm hoping the sound will also work. So I'm going to press the button. Oh, God. My word.
Spacebar.
There we go.
I'm so pleased to be here and to share in the celebration for Manny Schegloff. I'd like to share some of my experiences with Manny while I was doing a dissertation at UC Irvine in the early 1970s. Manny had just arrived at UCLA and was happy to drive down to UC Irvine to work with the students there that were working on conversation analysis. And it's those experiences which have been so valuable to me, both in developing the dissertation and in the rest of my career. So let me start by just summarizing what he offered to me. He was offering his insights and his feedback on whatever I had written. And the insights, of course, were insights about how sequence is crucial in the analysis of conversation. And the feedback involved looking at each and every instance that I included to see how well I did the analysis and how well it supported the main claims I was making. So this kind of careful, rigorous thinking and work and feedback both supported my dissertation and gave me resources to use when I was teaching later in life, in my career, and also in writing future papers. One paper in particular stood out at the time, and that was opening up closings. And there were so many lessons in it, including lessons on how sequence matters, how we need to be precise in the words that we use to say exactly what we mean, and also the cogent and beautiful argument that the authors made in it. So because of these contributions, I very much want to share my debt to Manny Schegloff, both for myself and for the discipline. Thank you.
All right. A final display of brilliance here.
Genius.
How about that? My word. Alessandro Durante, our next speaker, is Distinguished Research Professor of Anthropology at UCLA, the floor above again. A linguistic anthropologist, he was a major figure in the formation of the Center for Language, Interaction and Culture, and Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences. Sandra.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me, John and Myra and Naomi. Many years ago, I was asked to introduce Manny at the annual conference of the American Association of Applied Linguistics in Chicago. It was 1996. There were about 400 people there come to listen to Manny. My introduction was a short opening act, but it was also my opportunity to honor Manny, which is what I want to do today, with the difference that then Manny was in the audience, looking at me with a smile, wondering what I was going to come up with. What I said then still rings true now, that Manny is not here with us, and we still miss him. His presence filled the room then, and his absence fills the room today. So, many years before I came to UCLA, I was in that class, one of those classes that Eleanor mentioned. Actually, it was 1975, and I met Manny, who came to talk to us and tell us how to do transcription and why it's important that transcription, as Eleanor conceptualized, I mean, in a one-sentence title later, transcription is theory, really. Over so many years of friendship, I benefited from Manny's advice and teaching and came to know him as a truly original thinker, an uncompromising scholar, a fearless defender of the importance of the detail, a generous and sometimes terrifying teacher, a perfectionist of his own art form, and a fan of storytelling, movies, and straight-ahead jazz. In honoring people that we have known for a long time, we often end up talking about ourselves. The reason is that our life is really a project, and it is always a collective project. We do not just live as, we also always live with. What makes the difference is the meaning of the with, its duration, its emotional tone. In the academic world of research, being with, collaboration, takes on many forms. One has been mentioned already, the constitution, the creation of GLIC, which is the realization of an idea that Manny had, that he expressed in one sentence. He used to say, to do something where the whole is much more than the sum of its parts. One of the forms of collaboration is in academia, that someone takes the time to read something that you wrote and then tells you what they really think before you publish the piece. That's what I call a generous reader. Manny was a most generous, honest reader. We used to sit in his office or at the table outside Luval, and he would go over my latest paper page by page, example by example. Over time, our relationship evolved, and we realized that we were not only good at agreeing, but also at disagreeing. We really got good at it. When I wrote the first draft of a paper in which I was critical of Manny's use of the concept of intersubjectivity, I sent it to him over email, but didn't hear from him. Then one day, I got a phone call at home. It was Manny. He was going to send me some comments, he said, but first he wanted to tell me about them. I guess to prepare me. He could see that I had a good time reading through the philosophical text. But why was I wasting my time with philosophers? This question was accompanied by the recollection of his undergraduate years at Harvard, when he formed the opinion that there was no way of knowing which philosopher was right about any one argument, and therefore he had decided that he didn't want to waste his time with them. By the end of the conversation, we agreed to disagree. It was not the first time or the last time that we disagreed, but arguing was a sign of the respect that we had for each other and for their enterprise. The respect manifested itself in the way in which we were listening and taking each other seriously. I learned so much from that. Manny was an innovator. He was older than me, but sometimes I felt like he was the younger one, fighting against the canon while I was there defending the tradition. I was often going back to the history of ideas, where Manny was interested in the future. Manny at times could read the future, actually. I remember one time, during a conversation in his office, that John Heritage was there. Manny said, "You can do that when you'll be dean." Being future-oriented meant that he worried about all the work ahead. Manny wanted to leave something that would last forever and inspire his generation to come. And he did, through his writing, his recorded lectures, and thanks to his students and colleagues. For me, he's still with me. I still think with him. I still argue with him at times, but I'm mostly in awe of his remarkable insights. And I'm grateful to have had the fortune to spend some time, precious time, with him and call him my friend. Thank you.
How are we doing time-wise? I think we're doing okay. Perfect. Excellent. Well, I'd like to call on Jeff Raymond, to give on our next set of comments. Jeff wrote a thesis under Manny's direction that has become one of the most influential studies in all of conversation analysis. He's a professor of sociology at UC Santa Barbara, where between 2017 and 2020, he was also, I suppose, is this a good thing, Jeff? Chair of the department. Jeff Raymond.
It's a real honor to be here, and I want to say I've never felt better about the B+ that I also got in Manny's first class than I feel today, so thank you for that. I appreciate you sharing that. In various places, Manny talked about returning to the beginning as a way of thinking about closings, and so I want to return to the beginning. I recall the first class I took with Manny. I'd come to UCLA with the notion that I would be an ethnographer. But none of those classes were being offered in the fall, and my first-year advisor, Steve Klayman, suggested I take a course with a guy named Manny Schegloff. It changed my life. Manny changed my life. Manny opens the lecture by juxtaposing a common-sense conception of conversation as chit-chat, simultaneously ephemeral and trivial, with the way that a student of the social life of humans might appreciate it. This is why we need repair. With the way that a student of the social life of humans might appreciate it, as a, if not the, as he put it, primordial site of sociality, as supplying, as he put it, the procedural infrastructure for social institutions, as the arena in which culture is enacted, and as the ecological niche within which language emerged and to which it is adapted. These are all quotations of Manny. In his first lecture, Manny offers an apparently meandering list of occasions. Presidents talking to foreign dignitaries, workers talking on the shop floor, judges conducting trials, grocery store clerks talking with shoppers, civil rights leaders organizing protests, and so on, to illustrate the ubiquity of talk and interaction in social life and to underscore its centrality to human lives, experience, relationships, and institutions. After developing these themes with sketches and observations that link the recounting of these occasions to more familiar sociological topics, the lecture ends with his enactment of an exchange that dramatizes these points in a single, apparently simple exchange between a mother and a newborn child. In the scene, the mother looks to the child and coos, "Baby, baby." The child responds, her gaze finding her mother's eyes in response to the mother's summons. It's a bravura performance that ends with the class absolutely mesmerized. How could we have missed and misunderstood what we've been doing for so much of our lives? I could never see it in the same way again. For me, the lecture was the beginning of a much longer engagement with Manny, with CA, with the study of talk and interaction. It was the beginning of an engagement that has profoundly shaped my life. It's still underway. I'm still learning from him, from what he tried to show us. Within the first weeks of that course, I knew that I would become a conversation analyst and that if I could, I would work with Manny. In that course, and throughout the time I spent with Manny, when I learned something from him, it usually meant a wholesale reorganization of everything I thought I knew and what I thought mattered in the world. I became acutely aware of the lag that sometimes follow a breakthrough insight. It can take weeks, months, even years to fully reorganize one's way of thinking and acting once one sees the importance of what he had to say. It took me a while to say I was so proud to study conversation because it seemed like such a strange thing to say for someone who came to sociology to do something else. I sometimes thought I was slow in that regard or perhaps unusually resistant, but then I saw the brilliant Steve Levinson give a talk at UCLA, which he later published with the title, "Living with Manny's Dangerous Idea," that suggested he was struggling too with just some of what Manny was telling us. The title of the paper is, of course, a play on Daniel Dennett's Darwin's Dangerous Idea, and I think the comparison with Darwin is apt. We're still coming to grips with what Darwin told us and with the implications of much of what Manny had to say. We have a long way to go before we'll fully appreciate it. I still think of Manny most days, even though it's been years since I've last saw him, when I'm writing or teaching or eating chocolates. Manny loved chocolate. I'd give anything to have another data session with it. But I'm so grateful that he left me with so many, with a lifetime of beginnings to which I can return and revisit and remember what a remarkable person he was. I miss it.
The next speaker is Gene Lerner, who is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at UC Santa Barbara. Gene's dissertation at UC Irvine was one of the first, if not the first, that Manny chaired. He's published extensively on a range of topics, like turn-taking and repair that Manny pioneered. Gene cannot be with us today, but he's asked Kevin Whitehead to read his remarks for him. Kevin.
Thank you. It's my honor to read these recollections on behalf of Gene, who is my mentor, is my mentor. Manny was his mentor, so I think of myself as Manny's intellectual grandchild. I'm very proud to be that. Gene entitled these remarks, Doing Being Manny. Manny, doing being Manny. Here are a few personal moments that rush to mind. Harvey and Manny walking side by side along the corridor of UCI's Social Sciences Lab, a striking mental portrait with their eye-catchingly mismatched heights of an amazing partnership. I smile. Later on, at Harvey's urging, I drive up to UCLA unannounced to attend Manny's seminar in conversation analysis, aka his Monday data sessions. Manny has only one question for me. Am I working with conversational materials of my own? Doing the work was the only ticket for admission. One late afternoon, Manny and I are sitting in the Haynes Hall video lab. I've just sketched out very roughly how CA work practices might now be carried out in a computer environment. What does Manny do? He gets up, drives all the way to his home in Topanga, and brings back his Mac Classic. We then work into the evening on it. When Manny first brought our idea of a CA Summer Institute to the director of UCLA's summer sessions, explaining that we didn't want to be paid so as to keep the cost down for students, the director declared, it's the vision thing. These summer institutes took incredible amounts of planning and preparatory organizational work to make them run off smoothly. Without a second thought, Manny took on almost all of the pure drudge work. He felt personally responsible for these tasks. Everything from the convoluted combinatorics of ever-changing small group membership to the vetting and preparation of a vast reservoir of transcripts and recordings for students, to fielding inquiries from potential applicants, and much, much more. I take this as evidence of his untiring commitment to students and to nourishing the discipline, and doing so as a practical matter and not only as an intellectual project. A smallish gesture that had immense meaning for me. Shortly after Harvey's death, Manny came down to UCI to see what he could do for the remaining grad students. I was just starting to wade through the collection of data that would sustain my dissertation, but this was in the pre-computer era, and so sorting fragments into piles meant literally putting them into piles, which in my case required a huge number of copies of each fragment from a rather, for the time, large collection. Manny and I talked a bit about what I was doing, and then the discussion went on to other things. At the end of the day, we met again, and he asked me if there was anything at all he could do to help me get on with my dissertation. And I again mentioned all this data that I needed duplicated, which at the time meant mimeograph or ditto, and not even photocopying, if I'm not mistaken. It is a major production involving the creation of a ditto master for each page and then duplicating each page individually on a very error-prone contraption. Manny immediately walked me over to Harvey's secretary. Yes, faculty had secretaries at UCI, and asked her to make sure I could get all the copying done that I needed, with access to the machines and all the supplies I would need, and maybe even help in getting it done. Certainly no big thing, but truly a crucial gesture at a desperate time. And in closing, I offer one final heartfelt memory of Manny, my mentor, my collaborator, my good friend. I had a rather serious and extended illness some years ago, and others of more recent vintage. Now, I generally keep these sorts of things to myself, dealing with them quietly. I guess I've never been very big on social support. However, Manny's concern and just plain unwavering attentiveness to my circumstances has been a genuine comfort over the years. Here, as in every other aspect of his professional and personal life, Manny brought an intensity of purpose that always made a difference, a big difference. Thank you.
Galina Bolden, who is speaking next, is one of Manny's most recent doctoral students, graduating in 2005 with a thesis comparing Russian and English discourse markers. She's now a professor of communication at Rutgers University and the current president of the International Society for Conversation Analysis. Galina.
Thank you very much. I first met Manny in the spring of 1996 on a brief visit to UCLA as an undergraduate student looking for a graduate program. It was rather shocking to me that I could just drop in to see one of the authors of the famous turn-taking paper, which I had by then read or tried to read. I remember seeing several students camping out in front of Manny's office with their notebooks and papers spread all over the floor of the Haynes Hall. Manny told me that there was an assignment due soon for his course, and so the students were outside his office just in case they needed his help. This brief meeting ultimately inspired me to join the program. A couple of years later, when I was taking Manny's courses, I had another, even more fateful conversation with him. We had an assignment due on repair, specifically self-repair. I remember it very well. Some of you will remember it as well. And I struggled with my assignment and ultimately did it completely wrong. After the exercises were graded, Manny told me, "Galina, we need to talk." With quite a bit of trepidation, I came to Manny's office. I wasn't really expecting to be scolded. I knew by then that Manny would never scold a student who was trying their best. But I also wasn't expecting what he actually told me, a compliment on my serious attempt and an invitation to work with him on my dissertation. These meetings and so many of my other interactions with Manny show the kind of teacher and mentor Manny was: encouraging, demanding, inspiring, kind, generous, and a true champion for his students. Those of us who have gone through his courses at UCLA were not just learning conversation analysis and conversation analytic concepts, we were apprenticed into the discipline of CA scholarship. Manny told us to do daily calisthenics, just like musicians practice their scales or athletes do their daily exercise routines. We should start every single day by working with a bit of data. We learned from Manny that the discipline of doing CA also means being serious about it, to not stop at a hunch or jump to an obvious conclusion or fall back on what we already knew. Manny taught us how to read and reread and re-reread and re-re-re-reread CA papers. One of the most memorable things that we did early in his course was to look at the data fragments in a turn-taking paper and to search for and find errors in the analytic points that the data fragments were supposed to illustrate. And I think it speaks a lot about Manny as a scholar and a teacher that he was inviting this sort of scrutiny from his students. And it taught us a lot about what goes into doing and writing conversation analysis. Manny was deeply committed to making CA accessible to anybody with an interest, with a serious interest, no matter where they were in the world. While I was here at UCLA, I was helping Manny with his online publications archive. Now, this was around the turn of the century when such things were not common. Manny often talked about how he was doing this for scholars who might not have access to good libraries or financial resources to acquire the work. He also audio and then video recorded all of his lectures and discussion sections, again, long before this was a common practice at the universities. In the first instance, he was doing these recordings for the students in his courses, many of us were non-native speakers of English, and we might need multiple listenings to fully grasp what he was saying, to fully grasp the material. He also wanted these lectures to be widely accessible, and in fact, you can go to the ISCA, International Society for Conversation Analysis website and watch them. Manny's vision was to have CA practiced all around the world in all of the world's languages. Manny's last public academic appearance, as many of you know, was in 2014 when the International Conference for Conversation Analysis was held here at UCLA. He was roaming the hallways of the conference center, talking to many people with excitement, very much a proud father figure. I think he was seeing his vision of CA as a global, diverse, and serious discipline come to fruition. To me and to his other students, Manny was a guide, a coach, a champion, an inspiration, a mentor, and a father of our adulthoods. I miss him greatly.
Subsequently, he went to the Max Planck Institute for Developmental and Comparative Psychology and is now the lead faculty of the Comparative Cognition Lab at UC San Diego. Disloyal to LA though he may be, and though it may be perfectly reasonable to have that reaction, nonetheless, he was supervised by Manny at a distance, and we're very happy to have him here today. Federico.
Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words. I managed to get two B pluses by Manny. I first heard about Manny when I was doing an internship in the Netherlands at the Max Planck for Psycholinguistics. I was an undergraduate, and I was very bored by running psycholinguistic studies in which they were interested in seeing whether people would gesture while talking to an answering machine to somebody they did not know. And the answer was no. There was no gesture whatsoever. And I was like, what's the point of this? Why are we not looking at what they would do when they actually give their actions while interacting with those people? And so I'm talking to Steve Levinson, and he says, well, it sounds like what you're really interested in is social interaction. And I'm like, yes, so how do I study this? He's like, well, then you need to go to UCLA, and you need to take classes with Manny Schegloff. But just one little warning, it's going to be very hard. And I'm like, how hard? It's like, very hard. So I decided that's it, that's the goal. So I applied to spend 1 year at UCLA. And my flight to UCLA is on September 11, 2001, which means I'm actually at the airport, ready to board, and my flight is canceled. And I'm on the first flight in from Italy, approximately 12 days later, which means I did not manage to enroll in any of my classes for fall. And I really want to take this class with Manny Schegloff. So I'm on the wait list, and I go talk to him, and I say, can I take your class? And he's like, how did you hear about this? It's like, from Stephen Levinson. It's like, oh, you work with Stephen Levinson? I was like, yeah, I work. Yeah, I talked to him once. Yes, I work with Stephen Levinson. It's like, well, then you can take my graduate class. And that was my first B+. When I then approached other faculty here, John and Chuck, I just kept going, saying, hey, I'm taking this class with Manny Schegloff. And I'm like, the graduate class? I'm like, yeah. I was like, well, then you can take my graduate class. And so as an undergraduate, I started taking all these graduate classes because I lied to Manny about having worked with Steve Levinson. Now, the interesting thing was I entered his office that day when I asked him to take his class, and I loved seeing the poems on his wall. And there was one that stuck with me, and it was by Wallace Stevens, and the title was Not Ideas About the Thing, but the Thing Itself. And I said, what does it mean? And he said, that's where you start. And I was like, what does it mean? It means you don't start from the theory, you start from the data. You want to look at what is going on here. And it seems so alien coming from Italy that this was, was against anything I'd learned up until then. And that kind of stuck with me to this day. I mean, I'm very much doing things that probably I shouldn't be doing, but work with dogs, communicate with humans through buttons, and I study baboons in Kenya. But the reason I do this is because of another thing that Manny taught me when I was looking for jobs. I'd applied for 44 jobs, and I got one interview in cognitive science at UC San Diego. And I was like, I'm going to just tell them whatever they want me to do. I'll do anything. I need this job. And he looks at me and he says, no, you do not want to do that. You want to be exactly yourself, because otherwise you're going to have to spend the rest of your career pretending to be someone that you're not. And I was not very sure about that until, while doing this interview, one of my now colleagues looks at me and says, well, we're all a bunch of misfits here, and that's how we came together. And I realized that could be my home, and that's where my home is. I want to end just by saying that, many of you have said how Manny kind of lives with you, and this idea that it's going to be hard is what is very much part of my mind and life. And some of my graduate students involved in very long-term, difficult projects that do not lead to very quick papers sometimes ask me, why are we doing this? And it seems very hard. And I'm like, and that's exactly why we do it. Because the fact that others have not done it before doesn't mean that it was wrong. Sometimes it might just be because it was hard. And I think Manny has taught me this, and I'm very grateful for him. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Danielle Pillay-Shaw, who is a professor of communication at the University of New Hampshire. She got her PhD. Now, I'm not sure my brain isn't giving out at this point, but somewhere in the aughts of the 2000s, but I can't remember exactly which year. And she wrote her dissertation under Manny's direction, primarily on greetings. So, Danielle.
I will reveal what's in the bag in a moment, but I will just say, it's just for you two. So in a moment, I love to create some suspense. So first of all, I'm deeply, I know it sounds so trite, but incredibly honored and actually very emotional to be able to stand up here with my readers and aged and look out at all of you. Because in all honesty, I haven't had a chance to properly mourn his loss, and so this is the way to do that, and I really appreciate each and every one of you for being here, and especially you, and for allowing me to stand here. I didn't even know that I had this privilege until a few minutes ago, so thank you so much. But, okay, yes, I wept. Okay, wept, of course. So I'll get to some prepared remarks, and I won't take too long, I promise. But over the past decade, I've noticed a recurring pattern. It's maybe only 3 times, but that's a pattern. When a fellow conversation analyst introduces me, they tend to describe me as Manny's last student. And I've come to appreciate that as a fast and frugal way of understanding who I am. It's also not entirely accurate. You might have to qualify it. Manny's last sociology, PhD, I don't know, I'm not sure. Don't really fact check it. And again, this is not my claim to fame, I promise. Because as you might imagine, that formulation is incredibly bittersweet. At first a little bit bitter, maybe a little sweet. Since Manny retired in 2010, though it has offered some comfort and levity when others have quipped that after I filed my dissertation examining how people open their in-person encounters, does that sound familiar? Manny, quote unquote, felt he could retire. Now, this is not a Manny quote. I don't know who said this. I love this idea. I think it's just apocryphal at this point. But I'm sad when I think of him no longer directly mentoring up-and-coming students of the field and method that he pioneered. But I counterbalance that sadness, knowing that each day I feel him and I strive to channel his energy and his passion, his enthusiasm, his honesty, his his complete boldness for encouraging others to learn and use and ultimately do conversation analysis. That was certainly a question, a binary that I was given at one point. Are you going to use CA or are you going to do CA? And I knew the moral answer, and so I hope I'm doing that. But I live with conversations in my mind of me and Manny in his office, and I just want to make him proud. I was a student at UCLA for a very long time. First as an undergraduate communication studies major from 1994 to 1998, when I must confess I actually avoided enrolling in Manny's courses, specifically because I had heard how exacting he was and I was terrified of tarnishing my GPA. So I took John and Steve's class, okay. Still was very worried because I was in there with a bunch of graduate students, again, undergraduate. Okay. But I held it together. Hilariously, I put my final paper in Steve's box because I was afraid you would grade it, and then I found out you graded it, and it was okay. It ended up being okay, but that was my mindset back then. So I give you this as backstory, not to be trivial, but so when I get here in 1999 fall, and I'm enrolling as first-year graduate student in the Department of Sociology at UCLA. I am, however you want to categorize me, I'm not sure what MCD is appropriate, but I am type A. I am on it, right? I'm the kind of student that wants to visit all of my classrooms, days in advance. I want to get all my books, everything in order. So my fall first-year graduate student, I sign up for all my classes, everything is in order, and a few days into that first week, I go in to see Professor John Heritage, and he sits me down and he says, "Are you in Manny's class?" And I say, "No. Why would I be in Manny's class? I'm here to do something else. I'm going to study virginity." True, it's true. And John said, "You have to get in Manny Schegloff's conversational structures class right now." And I said, no, you don't understand. That's not possible. He's already met twice. The class is met twice. I wasn't there. He doesn't know who I am. I don't have the book. I cannot do this. He said, "Get in his class." And we were in Hershey Hall during the construction, so he walked me to Manny's open office door and said, there's Manny, talk to him right now, get in his class. And so I sit down, and this is how I meet Manny. And I want him to know who I think I am, right? I want to manage my impression of myself with him, but I'm doing it all wrong. And it was from that moment forward, of course he had audio recorded lectures, of course I listened and caught up, but the bottom line is, I was hooked from that moment, like everybody else you've heard ever since. And from the first moment I met Manny, I trusted him to light my scholarly path. Manny Schegloff was my advisor and mentor for 9 consecutive years, from 1999 through 2008. But he didn't just influence me professionally. In my experience of graduate study, the professional was often deeply personal. Manny was always, as everyone has said, warm, caring, honest, and reliable. He was my mooring as I weathered the very unpredictable currents of my early career. If I were to see him again today, I would thank him for always being benevolent and rigorous, and on a more personal note, for attending my wedding, holding my chuppah, meeting my firstborn child, and being there for me as I passed through many of life's milestones. Manny will always influence and inspire me, and in a very real and palpable way, he lives on in my teaching and research, and in the true vibrancy of our field. And that's all the prepared stuff, but to end on what's in the bag, the very, plastic bag, I'm sorry. So Manny did accept my invitation to come to my wedding, which blew me away. A teacher coming to my party? Like, what? And he held the chuppah, and Myra was there, and we had wedding cake, as you do at a wedding. And I had 2 kinds of cake, a carrot cake and a chocolate cake. And Manny knew about the chocolate cake. And other folks have mentioned that he liked chocolate. During my wedding, I think it was like first dance or something, Manny taps me on the shoulder and says, "When are you going to cut the cake?" And I'm like, oh, and you know what I did? I went ahead and cut that cake early. And so what is in the bag for you too, and I know it's weird, totally norm violating, breaching to do this, but you don't have to eat it. You can compost it if you want to. Is a fresh slice of the same chocolatey chocolate cake from the wedding that I think he really enjoyed, and I just felt like that would be the right thing to do today. So thank you, and thank you, Manny.
So, Jenny Mandelbaum is Professor Emerita at Rutgers University, where she was chair of the Department of Communication. She came to UCLA in the early 90s to study with Manny while writing a PhD at the University of Texas at Austin, a very famous supervisor called Robert Hopper. However, she abandoned Robert for extensive periods of time to study with Manny, and I can remember you arriving in UCLA and being so excited. It's been a wonderful ride. So, Jenny.
Thank you, John. I'm going to correct you just a little bit. I actually studied with Manny for 2 years in 1983 to 84 and 86 to 87. So I appreciate you making me 10 years younger than I actually am. During my 2 years at UCLA and over many ensuing years in which I returned to LA to work with Manny some more, Manny was incredibly generous with his time, his teaching, and his support. This generosity didn't stop at the doors of Haynes Hall. The Schegloff family adopted me and my husband. They were so warm and hospitable, helping us acclimate to LA, including us in holidays, feeding us delicious meals, and sharing their secrets of great things to do and great places to go. Their warmth and hospitality have continued over the ensuing more than 40 years. I'm so grateful to Myra and Naomi, as well as to Manny, for always taking such good care of us. My time at UCLA, as others have said, was truly life-changing. I was fortunate to work with several brilliant faculty members and graduate students, but the transformative effects of my time working with Manny were immeasurable. As we've heard with so much consistency today, it's no secret that Manny was both an intellectual giant and an incredible person. I know I speak for so many of his students and colleagues when I say that he had a profound and pervasive influence on my work and work habits, and also on who I am. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to express my gratitude and to articulate some fond memories. So back to the beginning for a moment. While I was finishing my master's thesis at the University of Texas, I contacted Manny more or less out of the blue in 1983, sending him a couple of chapters of my master's thesis and asking if I could come and work with him at UCLA the following academic year. He agreed on condition that I forget everything that I wrote in my master's thesis. The fact that he read those chapters and had substantive comments, even though he didn't know me at all, is indicative of the intellectual seriousness with which he treated his students. Another way in which I saw Manny's tremendous generosity was in the series of summer institutes that he, Jean Lerner, and John Heritage organized that was mentioned in Jean's address. I don't think they were paid for any of them, except perhaps for the first 6-week one. They gave countless hours and days and nights to create transformative experiences for aspiring conversation analysts while building the worldwide CA community of scholars. From these summer institutes, from my time at UCLA, from numerous visits and meetings over the years, I learned from Manny many important lessons that are crucial for an empirical discipline and that still influence my work on a daily basis. A few short examples. In working with interactional data, make observations rather than asking questions. As Galina mentioned, do your analytic and transcription calisthenics every day. You will think at the level at which you speak. That is, the level at which you want to be thinking should inform how you go about your teaching and other activities. Choose and use words carefully, even as has been mentioned, even if this means writing or speaking quite long sentences. Read books and engage in other cultural pursuits that elevate your thinking. That is, seek good intellectual influences. In 1983, I'm not sure if this really counts as an intellectual influence, but in 1983, Manny introduced me to NPR, National Public Radio. I had only been in this country for 2 years when I came to UCLA, and as a BBC radio devotee in the UK, I wasn't sure I would actually be able to make it in the US if I had to listen to commercial radio. It's quite possible that in addition to making sure that my thinking was appropriately elevated, by introducing me to NPR, Manny made it possible for me to stay in this country. There's much that I learned from Manny in terms of being a human being that I also try to emulate. A small sample. He had extremely high expectations of himself and his students, prompting us to seek excellence and to resist being satisfied with less. Exploit all opportunities for puns. Attending to the laughables in life is important and often instructive too. There's no downtime, no time out. Everything is grist for the intellectual mill. And as I've mentioned, be generous. While I was a student and over these many years, Manny was infinitely generous with his intellect, time, wisdom, and moral support. He always made time for me, whether it was to discuss something I was working on or to give me comforting and wise advice. I always felt supported by him. Manny was a prodigiously articulate person, preternaturally attuned to the nuances of interaction and the interactional requirements of any situation. His family also has this gift. When interaction became difficult for him towards the end of his life, Myra and Naomi had an incredible ability to discern what he wanted, what he needed, and what might make him happier or more comfortable. He could not have been more loved or better cared for. I think of everything that Manny gave me as the gifts that keep on giving. I hope I've been able to live up to his inspiring intellectual and personal ideals and to pass them on to my students. His influence on my work and on me as a person have been pervasive. He will be remembered and missed by all of us with infinite respect and love.
Our final speaker today is... That would be nice. That would be great.
I'm muscling in here because I know him better than John. Anybody who knew my dad knows my dad. He's still here. Anyone who knows my dad knows that he was very Jewish, even if he wasn't very religious. He was required to, if he wanted to go to Harvard on the family dime, he also had to enroll at Hebrew Teachers College at the same time. Oh my God, Marianne, hi, surprise. I love that. He was very Jewish in many ways. We had a congregation when I was growing up so that I could be bat mitzvahed, but we didn't have a Jewish home until we connected with Chaim Seidler-Feller at UCLA Hillel, and that was our home. We only really went for high holidays, but Chaim meant everything to us, the way the services went, the way Chaim approached being Jewish and thinking Jewishly was intellectually rigorous in a way that was very meaningful to my father, and they formed a beautiful connection. And so it's my tremendous pleasure to invite Chaim to come up and speak to you.
So believe it or not, I actually taught in the sociology department. It's a very generous department, as you heard, and inclusive. But I want to start with a reflection. And I've participated in numerous memorials for faculty over the years. And I think you do this so well. This is among the best things that you do. And what you indicate is the community that you created. People don't know about this. You know, they think about academics in sort of cold terms. They don't know about the connection, the relationships. If anything is appropriate for Manny, it's the strength of the relationships that you have represented here today and that you embody. It's something that I'm jealous of. It's remarkable. All right, so I mean, hold on to that with a sense of pride in what you've accomplished and the community that you've created. So what I'd like to do in the few minutes, I want to tell a story about Manny and then a teaching, because I know that Manny wouldn't have allowed me to get up here if I didn't teach something. Because he was always, I mean, if you can imagine this professor who was always eager. He came eager to learn. He was always the student as well as the teacher. Now, the story took place in September of 1999. It was in anticipation of the millennium, and I was standing at the podium on the eve of Kol Nidre, that is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and the father of a student of Mayim Bialik came running up to me. Did you see this? Did you see this? It was a full-page ad in the New York Times of a statement by Cardinal O'Connor. That, of course, since Yom Kippur began on Sunday night, and I was always preparing at the last minute, I hadn't read the New York Times that day, so I hadn't seen it. I looked at it for a moment, and I said to myself, I will read this letter tomorrow before the Yizkor service, before the memorial service. Now, this letter was an expression by Cardinal O'Connor in these words of the profound sorrow for the harm caused by the Catholic Church throughout history to the Jews. He asked for, in Hebrew, slicha and mechila, for forgiveness. Now, we only learned, by the way, after Cardinal O'Connor passed away, he never knew this, that his mother was Jewish. He declared that the church was doing teshuvah, that it was repenting, and he expressed a desire to start a new era of improved relations between Catholics and Jews. He ended the letter by wishing the Jewish community in Hebrew, L'shana tova tikatevu, may you be inscribed for a year of life. As I was reading the letter, I looked up and I saw Manny in the front row with tears in his eyes. So I went up to him afterwards and said, Manny, why were you crying? I can't forget what he said. I grew up in Dorchester, and every day the Irish kids taunted and bullied us. I never imagined in my lifetime that I would hear an apology from the church. Here was Manny, the most sensitive of men. I think Myra called him a big, sensitive guy, whose essential Jewishness came pouring out because he knew the power of words and because he believed in the possibility of change, even dramatic change from the Catholic Church. Now the teaching. Now the teaching was from a teacher, a great teacher of mine, a rabbi from Boston, whom Manny knew, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. And the teaching is regarding the Kaddish prayer that we will recite, or that Myra and Naomi will recite, or others who would like to participate at the end of our proceedings. This teaching is dedicated to Manny, the lifelong learner, or as I was fond of referring to him, the Talmudic intellectual, the secular Talmudist, listening so carefully for nuance, reveling in reasoned argumentation and deep analysis, and delighted by a novel and original interpretation, what we called in the yeshiva by chidush, lechadesh, to renew, the spark of discovery, that is, renewal. The teaching. Some of you may know that the Kaddish, the memorial prayer, the prayer recited by mourners, is not a memorial prayer, and it's not a morning prayer. It originated in the study hall, most appropriate. It was recited at the end of the lesson. And the function of the Kaddish was that those reciting were saying, we dedicate ourselves to the lesson that we just heard and to activate the ideas that we just learned about. They will not remain orphaned ideas in theory. We're going to act on them. So the issue here is that there was a special Kaddish that was introduced for burial. It included an additional paragraph in Aramaic that's usually not recited because most people find it too difficult to recite. But that Kaddish is recited on only one other occasion, and that's at the conclusion of the study of a tractate of Talmud. So my teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, asked, what's the relationship between the conclusion of a tractate of Talmud and the burial? And he said the following, that in Judaism we talk about the existence of two Torahs, two essential teachings, the written Torah and the oral Torah. Now, the written Torah is written on parchment, right? The oral Torah is written on our hearts and minds. It's a living Torah. The human being embodies the Torah. So Rabbi Soloveitchik suggested the following, that just as when we close the book, we dedicate ourselves to the lessons that we've just learned, so too when we close the book of life. That book, in fact, remains open. It's never closed because we dedicate ourselves to the teachings and to the character of the person who passed. And through that dedication, that person lives on. I thought to myself, what were some of the characteristics of Manny? We heard about them today, but maybe I'll summarize and add my own. The sweetest of human beings, a real mensch who was scrupulously moral, brimming with modesty and humility. I want to touch humility because we don't often encounter humility, and not often at the university either, I must say. A man of penetrating intellect and wisdom. He really knew how to think. The man who gave Myra a back rub those many years ago. A most caring individual, filled with joy, devotion, loving, overflowing with love. So it's our task, if we come together to remember him, what we're saying is, we pledge that we will in our lives not only remember Manny, it's not a matter of remembrance. The legacy lives on because we practice Manny. You've all talked about that. You do that in your research, but it's not just in scholarship. I think one of the things that we can learn, especially at a time when someone passes, is to focus on who the person was as a human being. That's really the most important thing. You talk about him as a mensch. That doesn't say it all. He was a supermensch, maybe that's it. That's the only thing that I can say. In the tradition, in the Talmud, the rabbis say, tzadikim b'mitatam nikraim chayim. It's a bit of an exaggeration. It says the righteous in their death are considered to be alive. Manny was righteous. Right? And in his passing, we all feel that he's still alive. And our commitment is to make sure that he lives on forever. Please rise for the Kaddish prayer. Those of you who want to join in, you want to come up to the microphone. Thank you. Come up to the mic. Come.
Thank you.
Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamar divrach kirotei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chaye chon u'vyom echon u'chaye b'chol beit Yisrael, v'adallah u'bizman kariv v'yimru Amen.
Yehei shemei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lomei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei b'kusha b'richu
Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiram b'yoma v'yimru Amen. Yehei shlomo Rabbah min Shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'bramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen.
If you can join in. Oseh shalom b'bramav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yadadadadam. If you don't know the word, Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I know it went a little bit longer than we expected, but there's snacks.
Just to confirm, there are a lot of snacks.